Okay, hello. Welcome to my video. I thought I would do a quick review of my bike, which, as you can see, is a Honda Hornet 600. It's an 03 reg, but I think it's a 2002 model. And the reason I'm doing this is you see so many videos reviewing newer bikes, which is understandable. However, when you first get your license, you're more likely, at least in my case and in a lot of people's case, you're not going to go out and buy a brand new bike straight away. You're going to get a slightly older second-hand bike, because let's face it, the chances you're going to drop it on your first bike is much higher than after you've been riding a while. And you don't want to drop, you know, a 7, 8, 9, 10,000 pound bike. You want to drop one of these, basically. You know, when you first pass your test, most people aren't going to have the money either to go straight out and buy a brand new bike, or even if they do, like I said, it's just not the best idea. So you're going to go for a Hornet, maybe a Phaser, a Bandit, a nice kind of not too sporty, not too toury, just, you know, an all-round bike, which is what this is. So I thought it would be useful, kind of mostly for newer riders. I mean, you also might go for one of these older Hornets if you just want kind of like the bike equivalent of a runabout, or, you know, for some commuting. It's certainly not gonna blow your mind. However, I thought I would review it from the perspective of, is it any good as a new bike, a first bike, primarily. So I'm going to do a quick walk around. So yeah, it's a CB600 FS, which means it's the fared version, as we can see there. It's most Hornets, especially this age, I think the newer ones as well, there was a newer model come out before they stopped, are naked. This one isn't, which, when I was doing my lessons, I did most of it on a completely naked, I want to say Phaser, but I think they changed the name slightly to FZ6 or something like that. It was only a couple of years old. It was a lovely bike, but it was completely naked. And shorter trips, commuting in town, that sort of thing, a naked bike is fine. And if you just want to go out and have a little blast, it's fine. If you want to do motorways or 70 mile an hour A roads, even 60, fairing, I can't describe how it's much better. The wind blast in your face from a completely naked bike gets tiring. It really just does irritate you after a while. And this isn't fully faired. It's not got a really high screen or anything else, so it doesn't block all the wind out by any stretch. However, it does enough. It takes the worst of it off you, so it doesn't become so much of an issue so quickly. I mean, if you was going to ride across the country, it would still annoy you quite a bit, but it's not bad. I mean, this bike, again, it's not really meant for touring. So I'm going to do a quick walk around from what I know about the bike, which I'm not an expert at all. Like I said, this is my first bike, so I'll point out some of the features. So yeah, from the front, fairing, it's got a single disc brake, twin disc brake on the front. The bike's basically standard with a few little tweaks that I'll mention when I come across, but the brakes standard. They work. I don't have much to compare them to, but they stop you. If you know, it doesn't take a lot of effort to lock the wheel if you wanted to. Which, to me, they're non-ABS, which obviously would be better. But if you can lock the wheel, they work well enough, and you can lock it pretty easily. Not that I go around doing that. I only want to be messing about a bit. It's a inline 4, as opposed to a twin, a V-twin, or whatever, which is the only type of bike I've ridden. And I'll come onto the engine a bit more in a bit, but it's fine. You know, it's smooth, relatively, okay, I'll come on to this again, relatively even power distribution through the rev. It does have a band of some degree. It's not as bad as one of the phases I've ridden. Okay, looking at the front, from the cockpit view, you've got the display there, which has your speedometer, rev counter, and temperature gauge. It doesn't have a petrol gauge, which is one of the big downsides of this bike. And when you're new, you're more likely to forget about it. And I was a bit iffy when I first started riding about. I sort of got down to the thing of I just fill it up every 100 miles, so I reset the trip meter and use 100 miles. I mean, I've done 110, I think, and it was fine. But it is only a 14-litre tank, which isn't big. If you're not, if you're not too familiar with these bikes, which again, from a first big bike perspective, you're not going to be too familiar. The 14 litres for this bike isn't a lot, so it gets. I've never run it out, but I would expect it to do maybe 120, 130, 140, which is good enough. But it's like I said, it's not a touring bike. If you did any kind of distance, you'd spend half your time in a petrol garage. It also has a oil warning light, neutral light as you'll expect, full beam light and indicator lights. The only button is the one just there, which is for reset the trip. Basically, you can turn it onto the full odometer or just the trip meter. Everything else is pretty standard, as you'd expect. It's a carburettor model, so it's got the choke there, and everything else you'd expect: brakes, clutch, blah blah blah, throttle. The mirrors, I'm a pretty wide guy. They're not amazing, but they're not terrible either. I do have to kind of roll my hand round, roll my wrist round to get any kind of view of the back, or tuck my elbows in. Or sometimes, if I really want to have a look, I'll actually lift my arm out a little bit and look between my arms. Otherwise, it is basically my elbows I see, which is lovely if you want to check your elbows out, but not so good for seeing what's behind you. What else have we got here? Seat, reasonable. After a few hours, your ass will start hurting, but that's probably normal for most bikes, except the touring models, which are really designed for you to be sat on them for hours and hours. It's got a grab rail. Never been a pillion on it, but from what I gather, it's pretty shit. It's useful for manoeuvring a bike around when you're off it, but other than that, pretty shit. It's a bit behind you. Most people tend to hold on to me if they're coming out with me. One of the add-ons this bike has got, which I don't know if you can see there, is the crash bungs. I'm very conscious of where I'm looking. I'm trying to look down below everything, so the camera sort of picks it. I've got a strange feeling I'm going to be filming a field over there, but we'll see. Yeah, the crash bungs, it has one on each side, as you'd kind of hope. This one it's basically, the bike's had a slide at some point. So this one, I don't know if you can see that. It does have some scuffing on there. It's not too serious, but it does show that it's been dropped, or at least the crash bung has. The only other evidence I've got that it's been dropped is, you'll see the handlebars are gold. I'm pretty sure that's not original. And there's also some of this kind of carbon stickers down the side, which is peeling off a bit, but they're almost certainly covering scratches. The guy who I bought it off, he wasn't like a long-term owner of it. I think he had picked it up cheap and was selling it on. Said yeah, they get put there to cover scratches, which I sort of knew when I bought it, so that's fine. Another change on this is the front indicators. It's got the mini ones, not on the back, which makes it look a bit disjointed. I'm not a big fan of the mini indicators anyway. If anything, I'd rather my indicators get seen rather than look good when they're not being used. It's got the standard exhaust, which I'll show you in a bit. It's pretty quiet. Single disc at the brake, single brake disc at the back, which again, it works. I don't think it's amazing, but if I put any pressure on it, I can get to the point where the wheel locks pretty easily. Again, that's not what you're going to want to be doing, but if you can do it to that level, once you get used to it, you can kind of control it, get the maximum braking power out of it quite easily. Tyres, I can't remember the front size, but I know the backs are 180s, which are pretty chunky, which I quite like the look of a relatively fat tyre at the back. It's something like that puts me off when you see a pretty big bike with a skinny tyre on it. Okay, so if we have a look at the actual bike I'll get on, it does have a tank pad on it. I put that on myself, if you can see. It's a pile of shit, basically. It's peeling off all over the place. It's only been on there about 3 months. As I said, I am a pretty big guy, so I do put a bit of weight on it, which has just torn off all the bottom left and the other bit, so I am going to get that replaced at some point. So I'm going to get on the bike and sort of go through a few bits from there. Okay, so one of the reasons I like this bike, one of the best features, is the position. I'm 5'7". I can almost flat feet both feet comfortably. I mean, it's comfortable. I can get 1 foot completely down and 1 foot about 3/4 down. But, you know, even on tiptoes, you'll be fine. It's kind of an average sort of weight. I can't remember exactly. I think it's about 180 dry and a bit more with fluids in. But yeah, the riding position, it's pretty upright, which makes it comfortable on long journeys. I was never ever going to look at a sports bike. That sort of forward riding position doesn't appeal to me at all. If I was just, you know, if I had 10 grand to spare and I wanted to buy a toy, I'd consider getting a sports bike. But for any sort of practical reasons, I'd much rather have kind of a standard sort of position, or even more upright than this. So my next bike I'm looking at will be some kind of tourer, or more of a touring directed machine. But yeah, so I don't know if you can see the mirrors where you are, but yeah, it's largely arm and elbow based for somebody my size. If you're a skinny chap or lady, I expect you'll be absolutely fine. So before I actually go for a ride, I'm just going to start it up so you can hear it. So I did have a few issues with this bike when I bought it. There was some kind of power issue where if I was riding around with the full beams on, spent too much time with my foot on the brake, like when you stop at traffic lights and the fan come on, there wasn't quite enough power being generated. Through the summer, where I've mostly been riding during the day, I've only had my half lights on, side lights, whatever you want to call it. You know, not the full lights. So I'm going to start it up. So it's a little bit cold, so it's not quite idling as high as it normally would. But yeah, there we go. It's pretty quiet, as I said. It's got the standard exhaust. It does have quite a nice engine scream, is what I'd call it. When you are pinning it about, it does make a quite aggressive sound, but it's not an exhaust kind of vroom, it's more of a I may cut that bit out, that's going to sound ridiculous, isn't it? But there we go. So yeah, let's go for a ride. Now when you're buying a new bike, one of the things you should be considering is how easy it will be to control. So that's what I'm sort of going to go through now. Because yeah, the last thing you want is something that's, you know, got a snatchy throttle, it's particularly heavy, etc, etc. And that's basically why I like this bike. I didn't test ride it when I bought it. Yeah, I didn't test ride it when I bought it. Again, it was my first bike. It wasn't taxed, and the guy mentioned, oh, I can't do a test ride for that reason. I think it's more that I don't want some numpty who's just passed his test been in the bike just around the corner. But yeah, so the controls, I find it really, really easy. So yeah, I learned on 2 phases, one comparable in age to this. So as I said, it's a 2002-2003 model. I learned on a phaser that was 2 years old. I think the name was the FZ6, and I learned on an actual phaser, I'll call it, which was probably around the 2002 or 2001, around that sort of age. So basically the direct competition to this one, and I prefer this, if I'm honest. Handlebars are reasonably wide apart, which I'm sure they're wider than they are on the phaser. And as I've said, I'm a wide guy. I like, you know, to be honest, I'd like them to be another inch or two each side out. Maybe not 2 inches, maybe about an inch. Something else to compare this to the phaser. So inline 4s, they tend to have, from what I gather, a power band. So if you're not familiar with that, it's when you reach a certain point in the rev range, the power will kind of be strongest at a certain point, and how strong the power band is will be, you know, how noticeable, how much more powerful it is at a certain point in the revs. And this does have one, but it's when I was learning on the second phase of the older one, there was a scary power band. I mean, when you're learning, you're going to be pulling away in the wrong gear. You're going to be in 3rd or 4th when you should be in 2nd or 3rd, and you'll start pulling away, and they'll be next to nothing, which is normal. However, a couple of times there was a point where it kind of the revs hit the power band and just scared the shit out of me. Just went from being reasonably gentle to, fuck me, I've just shit myself. In fairness, it's not really a major problem. It's just when you're learning, it can scare you. Once you're used to it, on any bike, I imagine, you sort of compensate for it. You do it automatically. You sort of, like I said, this bike has a minor power band, not a minor, sort of a smoother power band, and I sort of know from the engine sound roughly when the power and torque is going to sort of increase pretty significantly, and I sort of compensate for it on this bike, and you know, on the phaser or any other bike you'd be able to do that. But a bonus of this bike is it's smoother than some of the others. At least it's smoother than the phaser, and it's certainly not something that's ever worried me on this bike. Okay, I'm going to pull over in a second. Okay, whilst I'm at a standstill and I have a small amount of free road, I'm going to do a quick acceleration test-ish. Because this bike is fast. for what it is and for what it costs and for its age and blah blah blah, it's not a sports bike. With all those factors into consideration, it is very, very fast. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that was 60. I might do a little timer on screen actually to see how long that took. On paper, this bike does 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds. And it has 95 brake horsepower, I believe. Comparing that to my car, which is a 1.2 Hyundai, I know, I drive in style, which has 77 brake horsepower, and the 0 to 60 is about a day and a half. It's about 11 or 12 seconds if I remember rightly. So 3.6 to 11, it's fast. And I just did that 0 to 60 in first gear, so I didn't actually gone out of first gear. So yeah, the bike is more than fast enough. If you do keep it up around the power band, the sort of, which I sort of think on this bike is maybe 7,000-8,000 revs up, probably up until the red line. I think it does sort of peter out a bit, sort of just before you get to the 13,000, which is the red line. But from 8, 9, 10, 11, it's brown trouser time basically, for a new rider anyway. I'm sure experienced, R1 owners or Fireblades or whatever would ride this and think it's like a fucking moped. So yeah, I like the bike. If you want something that's pretty easy to control, not particularly expensive, parts are pretty good for this, but it's still fast enough to soil yourself on as and when required. This, have a look at this. The Phaser's good as well. I've never ridden a Bandit, but they all get lumped together. It's kind of, good standard first bikes. So definitely look at them. I mean, and you can pick these up now for, I paid 1,700 for this, but I'll be honest, I admit that I've overpaid. It was local. I sort of know the bloke for a friend of a monkey. I sort of, assumed it would be alright. And it was alright, but I think I paid 17. It was probably £1,500 worth of bike. And, you can probably, that was kind of over half a year ago. Probably a little bit cheaper. I mean, it had 18,000 miles on it. Hello. Okay, yeah, so okay, yeah, so that's my review. Sum it up, yeah, it's alright. Pretty much does it. If you got more money, go and get yourself an MT-07 or something like that. But if you don't, or you just don't want to spend that money on a brand new bike, have a look at one of these. Anyone's got any questions, anything they want me to clarify anymore, that kind of bollocks, I'm happy to talk about it. Anything I've missed as well. But yeah, take care and ride safe.